Great. Well, so you can hear we've got a wide variety of people and backgrounds here, but a lot of you are actually tutoring one-on-one, so that's going to be very helpful because you're going to be sharing a lot of your expertise with each other. So a lot of people, learners and instructors, think that one-on-one instruction is the optimum because you get the sole attention of the instructor. They can meet your needs. The learner feels that everything centers on them and this is the optimum learning opportunity. But that's not wholly true. There are advantages and there are disadvantages. And if you have been tutoring one-on-one, you probably know what those are. So we're going to take a few minutes now and you're going to work in your groups. And let's say this side of the room will be instructors and this side of the room will be the learners. So these instructors are going to just take, say maybe about 4 minutes to brainstorm the advantages of working one-on-one. And these instructors will brainstorm the disadvantages of working one-on-one. These learners will brainstorm the advantages of working one-on-one from the learner's perspective. And you learners will be brainstorming the disadvantages of working one-on-one from the learner's perspective. Just a quick recap of what we are going to cover in this workshop. So we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages, which you have just started to do, and then we'll discuss them with the whole group. And then we're going to look at strategies for minimizing those disadvantages or for enhancing one-on-one instruction. And then we'll develop some ideas to make your one-on-one instruction even stronger. Now let's go to the instructors who have been quickly passing the notes around to see who's going to do the talking. And you're going to talk about the advantages from the instructor's point of view.
We feel that we would have the undivided attention of the student. We can tailor the program to the student and accomplish more. And we think that we would be more flexible with time and place, and we can identify the needs of the student and focus on that need. And then we're also able to work at a student's pace and level. And we have more opportunity one-on-one to develop rapport. And then we're also able to make a more relaxed and comfortable environment. And of course, finding a location is easier.
Good. Let's listen to the advantages from the learner's point of view.
That, again, that for the student, the building rapport is important and that they feel more comfortable to speak. Also, they're getting the instructor's undivided attention. They can feel more comfortable and relaxed, and also becomes more of a personal experience for the student to get to know their instructor one-on-one.
Okay, the disadvantages from the instructor's point of view.
The disadvantages of working one-on-one as instructors would be all attention is on the student all through the class. That might be difficult. There is shyness with a student. It's hard to find out what their objectives are more often than not if all the attention is focused on them. There is less vocabulary exchanged possibly because of that. There's no group work, no partners to work with for them. Less socialization and fewer interests to focus on.
And you know, a lot of students come to your classes for the socialization, don't they? Okay. Anything else this group wants to add?
Yeah. Cultural problem or conflict of personality between the instructor and the student themselves.
And the disadvantages from the learner's point of view.
A lot of what they said as disadvantages to the instructor seem to be the same as what we were finding for disadvantages from the learner. Personality conflict, a feeling of isolation, a dependence on the instructor. There's no other points of view. You do what the instructor tells you to do or whatever. And a lack of peer interaction. And getting explanations that maybe somebody else understands the concept that another learner does not. And between them, they can figure it out if the instructor is not being clear. Yeah. They're in the same boat. They're both trying to, or everybody's trying to learn a different language, and so they understand that point of view.
Okay, just to recap those. So the advantages, now this is not a definitive list, you know, but it's amazing. I mean, this is a list I came up with. You guys develop your own lists. It's amazing how similar the ideas were that came out. So I think we're somewhere near the right answers. So there's no mixed levels, so of course that makes it easy for planning. Selection of material can be entirely relevant to your one learner, and you can spend as long as necessary to address learners' needs and explore areas of personal interest. Then of course you both came up with sort of the personal relationship that could develop. So advantages for the learner, lots of opportunity to speak and to listen. Now the flip side of this, of course, is they're only listening to the instructor, not to other learners. The learner can contribute to the direction of the class. It can be just meet their needs. The learner's strengths and weaknesses can be addressed more completely, and learners can progress at their own rate without self-comparison to other learners, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Disadvantages for the instructor. Easy to get sidetracked from goals. Can you see how that might happen? Right? Because you have your lesson planned and your learner comes in and says, I have to go and do some banking today and I don't know how to do it. So you spend that day on the banking. So then you plan your next lesson and they come in and say, I've got this letter from my daughter's school. Can you help me figure it out? So you do that. And 3 months down the road, you look at what your goals were and you've been sidetracked. But we'll look at a way to set goals so that you can incorporate them into any of these activities. The instructor's always on, so it seems to rely quite a bit on you for the direction of the class. You don't have those other topics brought up from other learners. You don't have that interaction. No pair or group work, so that can be monotonous for the instructor or the learner. Learners may see reading and writing as a waste of time with their instructor. Have any of you encountered that? Yeah. And yet you need those 4 strands of language to all be developed to support each other. So the reading and writing is every bit as important as the speaking is listening, but if they only see you for an hour and a half or 2 hours a week, they think this is when I want to practice my speaking and get feedback on my pronunciation. And the learner may see the instructor in role of the counselor. Any of you experience that? Yeah. And you know, you could be their window onto Canadian society, Canadian culture. So you may end up doing a lot more than just working with their language, and you may have to set some boundaries around that. And disadvantages for the learner. So where we said it was difficult for the instructor to monitor the goals, it's difficult for learners to monitor progress without other learners for comparison. So who do you think they're always comparing themselves to if they're working one-on-one with you? The instructor. And your English is hopefully a lot better than theirs. But, and it may be difficult for them to see the little steps that they are making. It can be tiring as the learner is in constant interaction with the instructor. So have you tried to speak a different language for an hour and a half or 2 hours straight when you're just learning it? It can be exhausting. At least in a classroom, you can tune out for a while or let somebody else do the talking while you just kind of digest. Class could become monotonous, no matter how hard the instructor tries. And lack of sink-in time. Think about how you learn. Do you learn in a linear fashion, or do you sort of something hits you, it sinks in, comes to you in a couple of days, oh, that's what that meant. Is that how you learn? Well, think about that for a minute. I need a lot of sink-in time, and I need a lot of run-throughs of material coming at me from different directions before I learn things. And again, the learner can become dependent upon the instructor. So both sort of socially and emotionally, but also who speaks more slowly and more clearly than an ESL instructor? No one, right? So they can communicate with you in your little one-on-one class, and they go out to the supermarket and people don't understand them. Right? So at least in a class situation, they have practiced speaking with different people and people that will say, I don't understand you. Whereas as the one-on-one tutor is more likely to gear their language to the learner's level. And also you develop this kind of knowledge about how your learner is communicating, and you can probably understand them better than other people can. So there's that kind of dependency. So what we're going to look at now is how to minimize these disadvantages. But before we do that, I want you to just think about some learning experience you've had as an adult, because you're all working with adults, aren't you? Yeah. And so as an adult, have you taken a course of any kind? Okay, whether it's a classroom course or a one-on-one, and whether it's aerobics or an academic course or a language course. Think about that for a minute. And then at your table, I want you to just tell the other people at your table what made it a positive experience or what made it a negative experience. So as an adult learner, what makes a good course for you?
The interaction of hearing the other students, that we all would have to make up sentences in Spanish and say something particular. And I think it was hearing the other students, and then I felt that I could contribute to, but I think it was the practice and the practice and the practice that I found positive in that course. Disadvantage in that course was not exactly the course itself, but was my practicing at home. If I didn't do my homework, then I did not feel secure in the class. So I think that the students that we teach might have to do homework too.
I took a Spanish class too, and the thing that I really appreciated about it was that he had us doing role plays, going into a restaurant, and you had to act, have the vocabulary, so you did have to do your homework. And everybody took a role, so you never knew which role you're going to get and what you'd have to say. It was spontaneous. So that was very...
Skits are always really good. I think for any disadvantages that I've ever had throughout university or any other course I've taken is an instructor who is, dull for one. But I had one instructor that just basically did everything. You could read along in the textbook as she talked, It was right out of the textbook. So there wasn't anything different beyond the resources that they gave you.
We thought that it's important for the presenter or the facilitator to use a multimedia approach, so that it's not just a lecture, that there's videos, interactions, small group activities, that there's a lot of group sharing, because as an adult you bring certain experiences to the group, and having the opportunity to share not only with the facilitator but with the other participants, sometimes that's a learning experience as well. Because we all come from different background and variety of experiences. We also acknowledge that high energy facilitator has a way of transcending, especially if it's an evening class. It's nice to have somebody that will...
Or after lunch.
Yeah. Somebody who's knowledgeable in the field, so that if you do ask a question, they're able to actually give you a response that means something. That it's a comfortable environment. We were talking about, the room, the lighting, the temperature, the seats. If you're using screens and whatnot, that everything's working. That there are strategies presented so that you can actually absorb the content. So rather than just being spoken to, that there are also strategies for utilizing that content and, some hints on how you're going to remember what it is that you've taken, such as handouts. And also that it's very important that the facilitator asks why the students are in that specific classroom, because sometimes if the change is, if the need is pervasive throughout the group, the facilitator can adapt what particular interest in that group has, so that it's not just a prepared lecture, but they're able to adapt and, address those needs of the group.
And the other students, because they make it a serious. You're there for a commitment to make the commitment. It's serious, so that helps you to do that. Well structured. The instructor knows the information and presents well. Nice flow. Questions and interaction. Interaction and life skills and experience. So working with the other students, build on each other's knowledge. And learning styles, of course, we brought that in with the different ways to learn. One was opportunity for feedback at the end. It's good to have people be able to say what kind of learning experience it was, and an instructor that can think on their feet. Because often, as we all know, it goes a different way. You think you're right on track, and suddenly it'll take a different tack, and you need to be able to adapt to that.
That we give a positive experience about a class that we took. And I was in a medical terminology class, and the instructor asked us to give a speech, 4 to 6 minutes. Well, we were all sweating blood because we didn't want to give this speech, but having to do it, we learned by doing. And I remembered what I had to do, the content of the speech. Everybody had fun and learned a lot. So it was learning by doing. So that would be probably a negative if you can't understand what's being delivered.
So now I'm going to give you a worksheet that covers the disadvantages, right? So it lists 4 disadvantages from the instructor's point of view and 4 disadvantages from the learner's point of view. Here are the disadvantages. How would you minimize those? Okay? If you were a learner, how would you choose to have your instructor structure the class so those are minimized? And on this side, now you people will be looking at it from the instructor's point of view, so you're going to look at the 5 statements on the top of the page. How will you minimize those disadvantages in your class? So if you look at the instructor's statements here and the learner's statements, you'll notice they're just kind of the flip side of the same coin. For the instructor, it's easy to get sidetracked from goals, and for the learner, it's difficult to monitor progress without other learners for comparison. So again, not seeing if they're meeting their goals. So what were some of your ways of minimizing those? So whether you're an instructor or a learner, you can speak up here.
The student could ask, how am I doing? We would like the tutor to keep a file for comparison. So, if, for instance, what the words the student was reading when they first came, and here 6 months later, this is what you're reading now. This is terrific. This is how much you've increased. Positive reinforcement, and daily tasks. Ask them about their daily tasks. Is it easier to go to the supermarket now, or is it easier to go to the bank and do your business at the bank? So just those things.
And I update it every 2 months, so we record them, audio record their reading, and I let them listen to, because sometimes they're not even cognizant that, how much they've improved. And I'll say, okay, listen to what you sounded like in September, and this is what you sound like in October. So, and when I finish with that student, I just give them the tape, and that's sort of like a progress report, yeah.
That's great. And you date it.
I date it, and I always get their permission, on the tape, yeah.
Excellent. the instructor is always on, and for the learner it's tiring as the learner is in constant interaction with the instructor.
So building in your lesson or in your chunk of time, some quiet time where they're doing reading by themselves or they're doing some writing. If you have a tape recorder, where they can be taping themselves, something to that effect, so the focus is away from that relationship back and forth between the two of you to actually onto a task. Games, Laura uses lots of games and things where they're doing stuff, so they're focusing on another task rather than that interaction. And that was from the instructor side.
So changing the activity. They can still be practicing the same skills, but you can change the activity so it's less focused, and as you say, you can be doing something else, but still practicing the same language. Yeah, that's good. Anything else?
A student who loves to bring Oprah magazine, and she just loves it, but can't really read it, so that's what they do for their break.
Yeah, so do you actually take a break?
Yeah, we take several breaks, actually.
How long do you have them at a time?
About 2 hours.
2 hours,
Yeah.
Yeah, breaks are good, aren't they? And that's a good socializing time,
I was going to
too.
say that gives them time to do the socializing piece, and it doesn't sort of get into the lesson.
Good.
Not always possible, but okay. The next point: no pair or group work, so class can become monotonous. We should probably call on these two tables. Yeah.
We talked about an idea that would actually cover many of the disadvantages, and for example, if we were talking about poetry at one point, then something we might include would be a homework assignment, such as, now we've discussed a poem, so your homework for the week is to find a poem that you can explain to us. Then part of the variety of the class that next time would be the student presenting the poem to the instructor. And then that would take away the dependency on the instructor. It would give the student time for the ideas to sink in throughout the week. As I said, it provides the variety, and it's not so tiring on the instructor. So it's putting more dependency on the person as the learner to become.
More onus on the learner.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe for half an hour we could get up from our table and go outside and go for a walk and talk about the trees and the surroundings, or walk to the Safeway, talk about what's inside Safeway, the different names, have a conversation about what we're seeing outside or wherever we're walking to.
Well, just an idea, you could actually limit the amount of time you are together with that student too. I mean, I know that the world that we live in, it's all broken up into time slots, but you know, if you have an idea of what it is you want to teach or get across to them, get it across in a short amount of time, and then disperse.
Maybe write a summary over the week of what they have done, and I think it was this table that said bring in their everyday activities, but have them bring it in written form, and then they could read it or discuss it.
What about if learners see reading and writing as a waste of time with their instructor? And then the flip side of this is that lack of sink-in time.
I have a gentleman that didn't particularly care to do the reading and writing in his own language, and so he's laughing at me going, well, I didn't want to do this when I was speaking Tagalog. I don't really want to do this now, So it is a matter of his personal choice. He's not a reader. He knows how to read, but he doesn't want to. So you kind of have to find some interesting things. I spent a lot of time trying to talk to him about what he's interested in, so that we could find something that he would actually read.
Journaling has been really positive with some of the ESL students. I have several of them writing me documentary style on their escape from whatever country they've left, or their journey to come to Canada. And it also affords an opportunity then for them to verbally fill in the blanks. Like they'll write, 1 day's worth of what happened to them, and then I'll have questions and they will verbally respond. So not only are they practicing their writing, but they can then provide feedback verbally as well.
Sure. And this also goes back to your point. You can do the same thing through a variety of activities, right? So even if you've been introducing some vocabulary and now you start to play a game where they have to read the directions of the game, that's reading and writing. And it might take, they don't have to speak for a while or listen to you. They're practicing the same skill. Some of your learners will be well educated in their own country, some won't. The ones that are well educated probably have academic learning strategies. A lot of them won't have. And maybe you need to tell them that these 4 strands of language, reading, writing, speaking, listening, all support each other. And if you can learn how to read and write a bit, your spoken language will improve too. And it will help you remember things. And also if you can link it to what's relevant in their life, then they'll want to learn it because it is relevant. What about the last one? Learner may see instructor in role of counselor, or the learner can become dependent upon the instructor. Have any of you had this situation?
The people at Catholic Social Service do not become personally involved with your students. Some people tend to want to put their problems on your lap, but we were given a whole list of agencies that the Catholic Social Service deal with, whether it's housing or anything, and that we should not try to become a counselor to these people. You're there to instruct in ESL, and if they have problems, here, present this alternative where they can contact help, you know.
Boundaries. That's right. And I always stress this with my tutors when I train them, is to know your own boundaries and know where you're prepared to go. And we are not counsellors, but also guidelines and policies within the agency. If your agency has a good set of policies and guidelines, then you have something to fall back on, and that's a really good place to be. So, and referrals.
Yeah, referrals. And you might need to teach them the language, how to express themselves in an interview for these referrals, or how to fill out forms. And those are great skills to be teaching. Okay, so I'll just go over some of the points that I put down. You guys all had great points, and I think some of them I haven't even mentioned here, and I may have come up with some that you didn't mention. So easy to get sidetracked from goals, or difficult to monitor progress without other learners for comparison. First of all, do a thorough needs analysis. Now, probably if you're with an organization, the coordinator of that organization will have done a needs analysis, so you know where they're starting, where your learner's starting, and where you should go from there. But always spend your first class doing a thorough needs analysis. And what kinds of things should you be looking at? What kinds of things should you be looking at when you do your needs analysis? Okay. Now, so far we've had two other suggestions that you could look at in a needs analysis, and that was their strengths and weaknesses in language and their previous education. The one single best indicator of success in language learning is previous education. So that's a good thing to know. If you're working, and you probably would know that, but if you're working with somebody that has a university degree in their own language, you can expect that they will learn pretty quickly because they have good academic learning skills. They know how to organize their material and how to help themselves learn. If you're working with somebody who has very low literacy levels in their own language, you can expect slower progress. And so don't get frustrated and don't let your learner get frustrated. That's just a fact, probably. If you are tutoring somebody who tries to speak English with you for an hour and a half a week and then goes home and lives with her Vietnamese extended family and doesn't have to speak English at home, has a Vietnamese doctor, lives in a Vietnamese community, can do all of her grocery shopping and everything else in Vietnamese, she's not going to make fast progress either. So those are good things to know. If you're working with a fellow who has just arrived here and he really desperately needs to get a job, he's very highly motivated, you know what you have to work with him on, right? And you know that he will be highly motivated. But you also know that he doesn't need to probably learn about grocery shopping. He needs to know how to do job hunting, stuff like that. So here are some ideas. So general information, do they have a job? What is the job? What kind of hobbies? What kind of travel? Because these are good topics that they might want to discuss later. These are their interests. And any other notes that you can make. What is their motivation? What do they want to learn English for? Why are they with you? Do they need it for work? Do they want to go back and go to NATE or go to university? Do they just need it because they want to help their kids at school? What is their practice of and their exposure to English? Is it only this hour and a half a week, or are they working at a job where everybody around them speaks English? So they're going to be highly motivated and get a chance to practice every day. Their language learning experience, so previous studies and attitudes to learning language. Have they tried to learn another language before and were very successful at it, or unsuccessful? Has that colored what they think their chance of success is in learning English? You know, so you'll meet people that speak 4 to 5 different languages, so they probably have good language learning skills. Do they like to study on their own, or are they just going to study when they're with you? Their attitudes to language learning. And then their learner's analysis, right? What do they think are their strengths and weaknesses? And then your analysis. What do you, I mean, you've already got this from whoever sent them to you, but you can also write down your own little notes on their oral level and their written level. Where do you think they are? And any other notes like pronunciation or grammar that needs special attention, or maybe very formal textbook English but can't, they don't sound like they're really carrying on a conversation. So that's just an example of something you can do. So once you've done their needs analysis and you know why they're with you, then you start setting your goals. So you set specific goals and you check in frequently to see if they're being met. This helps the learner monitor their progress. So let's just take, for example, as an example of goal setting, a mother who has to do the grocery shopping, or no, has to do the banking. Okay, she wants to be able to write checks and understand the bank statements. So what would be a goal for that? We'll say this is a fairly low-level language learner at this point. Yeah, she has to learn to write the numbers numerically and the words, right? How to spell them properly. What else?
She has to learn how to write her signature.
Yeah, her signature in English, right? In case she's Arabic. Right, so she has to know what to say to the teller. What else? How to fill out the check, right? Right. May not have used it in her country. Right, 12 months of the year, their names, how to spell them, and their abbreviations, right? And the days and the year. Okay? So those are all goals, right? So the big goal might be to be able to write a check. And also, why is she writing a check? Is it to pay the electricity bill? Then she has to know how to look at the electricity bill, find the amount that she has to pay, and then transfer that to a check. And who to make it out to. So look at the electricity bill and find out who to make it out to. So how would you go about teaching this? But How many of those skills are transferable? Yeah, pretty well all of them. How to navigate her way through forms, the form of the check, how to fill that out, and all of those other skills she needed for the check are transferable too. The months, the days of the week, the numbers. So write each of those down as a goal, systematically. Now, when you're teaching these, are you going to teach one until she's mastered it? I mean, she can practice, well, and she can practice little bits of everything until it all comes together. And as it starts coming together, you can put a tick beside the goal, or she can put a tick beside the goal. I mean, who has reached the goal? She has, not you. Introduce variety in classroom routines and set up to avoid any possible monotony. So we already talked about moving it to different locales, or if you're doing something with grocery shopping, going to the grocery store. Museums. What are some other field trips you can go on? Ride the bus, if they've never ridden the bus before. Maybe give her the map. Maybe you're going to walk to a store and have a little map and say, this is where we are on the map. Let's see if you can take me to the store by following the map. So always, whatever you're going to do, think, what can I do to one-up this? What can I do to bring something else into it? Give learner downtime during class to let things sink in or re-energize. So breaks, a lot of you say you take breaks, that's great. Switch to a game, which will give you a different focus and is a little bit less stressful. What about even listening to music? Bringing in a song and listening to some music, or standing up and stretching. Do a little teach them some yoga, or get them to teach you some yoga or some Tai Chi. Schedule that in. Okay, again, learner training. If you have somebody that's well educated in their country, they probably have these learning strategies. But if you have people with low literacy levels, they probably haven't dealt with a lot of paper before. They haven't dealt with binders. You will have to teach them how to organize their binders, to put their date at the top of the page. They can use highlighters or underlining for keywords. They can group things by date or by topic, how to do reviews, all of those kind of organizational strategies, how to study, how to remember things. And arrange assignments that involve learners interacting with other English speakers and with the community. I think you have to make sure that the homework is entirely relevant to their life. Then this is something I use with my learners. Simple homework assignment. It does a couple of things. It gives them something that they can do that is homework, keeps them practicing their English when they're not with me, and it keeps them practicing their English in the community. And it helps them realize how many opportunities they have to speak their English. So if I just say, okay, I want this filled in by the next time we get together, and what you have to do is when you speak English to somebody, you just have to put the date or the time here, who you spoke English to, and what you said. So after you've done your assessment and set up your goals, then record keeping. And several of you have already mentioned ways of record keeping. Checklists, audio tapes, lists of words that they can read or write. Even just keeping the writing samples that they hand in, make sure you date them. And, you know, if possible, if you can photocopy them and give them something to take home and keep a photocopy for yourself. But these can also be used for review. And if you're keeping writing samples, I would urge you to keep rough copies. You know, some days just take in their rough copies. Some days have them edit it and then take in their good copy, because those are very different skills. Development of independent language learning skills. So if your learner needs those, build those into the lesson. How to organize their materials, how to study. Try to hit the 4 strands of language. If you don't hit them in every lesson, at least make sure that you hit them in every couple of lessons. So if you're doing all speaking and listening in one lesson, then the next one try to make sure you integrate some reading and writing. Try to incorporate all of their learning styles, or all of the learning styles, so you build on their strengths and bolster up their weaknesses. So that means visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Resources. What resources are you going to use? And use variety in your resources. And then how are you going to assess what they did that day? So once you figure out what you're going to do, you should be thinking right away, how are you going to assess it? And then the homework. Okay, and we talked about one thing for homework. What are some other good homework activities that you people have had? There's usually pictures to back up the language, and there's usually headlines. And they might even see the same thing in the newspaper. And they can always turn it on several times during the day. Community assignments. So again, this is homework assignments that you can give them to get them out in the community, so it's not, it's more applicable, right? So they can make a phone call to find out schedules, fares, and information. So a lot of you have swimming pools or movie theaters that they can phone to find out when it's open, how much it costs, what's showing, and they don't even have to speak to anybody, right? It's a recording. So it can be, you can tell them they don't have to worry. If they get confused, they can just hang up and they can phone again. They can phone as many times as they need. Listen to the radio for 15 minutes each day. That's pretty hard, 15 minutes, depending on their level. But now watching the news is good on TV, but why would listening to the radio be different? And find out something new about their community. So they can find that out from newspapers or flyers or little neighborhood bulletins, whatever they need, but they have to find out something and bring it into you. Particularly if they have kids, you know, and maybe want their kids to get into soccer or into sports and they don't know what's available. You can tell them what's available, but eventually they're going to quit working with you, and they have to know how to find out what's available on their own.
Every day, and then she was to write one sentence of something that she had done that day. I cooked dinner, I slept in, whatever. Those are examples.
Just one sentence.
Just one sentence.
So here are some authentic materials that you can use for resources. And you know, if you're working with adults, people always say they don't have enough resources. But if you were to just keep track of the resources that you have in your household and that you use in a week, you would have enough to teach your learner there. So brochures, pamphlets, magazines, newspapers, and flyers. Just how to navigate through the newspaper. How to find the want ads, maybe in the newspaper, how to read the want ads. Flyers, what are all of these flyers that come to their house? And what do they mean? How to read them if it says 2 for 1 or rain check or expiry dates. Phone books, how to use the phone book. And the phone books actually are a wealth of information, you know, for the emergency numbers, and get them to look up their own name and number in the phone book. Calendars, how to use calendars properly. A lot of them, again, we're talking about maybe about low-level literacy learners, but don't realize how valuable calendars can be and the information you can get from them. Catalogs, how to use the index in catalogs. Bills, banking materials, application forms, recipe books, labels. Fun to do cooking. Menus are great. Yeah. Yeah.
For instance.
Oh, sure. And then you can use the menu and role play ordering. So you've got the language in there, and then totaling up the bill and adding on the GST, and then a tip, and then how do they pay for that. So you can just extend it. Signage, maps, floor plans.
Self-information. But if you go to Travel Alberta, they give you those large maps with Edmonton street map on the back. So they're very useful. And the same with ETS with their little books that they have with all their travel plans.
And that's really useful.
Yeah, and
to
it's all
work.
free.
Yeah,
which is
that's great too.
Yeah, good.